State law claims are typically heard in state courts, but through a mechanism called diversity jurisdiction, a plaintiff can choose to bring those claims to a federal court. When that happens, the court faces a choice of law problem. Take the state of Delaware, for example. In a recent case, a patient named Harold Berk sued Dr. Wilson Choy and BB Medical Center in federal court over a botched ankle treatment. To weed out frivolous lawsuits, Delaware enforces a strict gatekeeping statute. Title 18, Section 6853, dictates that any medical malpractice complaint must be accompanied by an affidavit of merit signed by a medical professional. If a plaintiff fails to provide this affidavit, the state penalty is immediate. The court clerk is legally forbidden from even docketing the lawsuit. This sets up a direct conflict with federal law. Under the Rules of Decision Act, a federal court is instructed to apply state substantive law. However, under the Rules Enabling Act, federal courts are bound by their own uniform code for procedural ladders, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. The resulting Supreme Court case, Berk v. Choy, exposes a precise mechanical debate. What happens when a state gatekeeping law tries to graft itself onto the anatomy of the federal rules? To resolve this procedural standoff, the court uses the Shady Grove test. Step 1 asks, do the federal rule and state law answer the same question? If they overlap, Step 2 asks, is the federal rule valid under the Rules Enabling Act? Crucially, a state's underlying policy goals, like Delaware's desire to lower malpractice insurance costs, do not factor into this equation at all. Federal courts must diagnose these conflicts strictly as mechanical engineering problems. If the rules occupy the same space, federal procedure displaces the state law. Writing for the majority, Justice Amy Coney Barrett identifies the conflict squarely at the pleading stage. She frames the disputed question this way: what information must a plaintiff present about the merits of their claim at the outset of litigation? This diagram contrasts the two standards. Delaware demands an accompanying affidavit of merit, while Federal Rule 8 requires only a short and plain statement. By specifying this, Rule 8 acts as a ceiling, implicitly forbidding actual evidentiary proof at the pleading stage. The defense offered a workaround. They argued the affidavit is a free-floating evidentiary condition that allows a judge to dismiss the case early. Justice Barrett rejects that argument. This timeline maps the federal rule's built-in sequence, culminating in Rule 56 for summary judgment. As the timeline expands, we see Rule 56 explicitly requires a discovery period before a plaintiff is put to their proof. Because Rule 8 establishes a concrete limit on what is required to state a claim, states are blocked from appending evidentiary hurdles. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson agrees that the Delaware law cannot apply, but her concurrence argues the majority is contorting Rule 8, noting that an affidavit is a separate document entirely distinct from a pleading. Instead, she reframes the central question: what exactly is required to start a civil action in the first place? This procedural pipeline illustrates Federal Rule 3. A civil action is commenced simply by filing a complaint. But Delaware's law dictates the clerk cannot docket the case without an affidavit. Forcing that requirement into the system directly jams Rule 3. Justice Jackson then identifies a second collision point, concerning how judges evaluate dismissals under Federal Rule 12. This schematic represents a judge's view during a Rule 12 motion to dismiss. The judge is strictly contained within a boundary box, prohibited from considering matters outside the pleadings. Delaware's affidavit exists entirely outside that boundary box, triggering a rejection. Under this structural model, the state law fails on two fronts. It illegally blocks the commencement of the suit, and it demands a dismissal protocol that the federal rules actively forbid. Whether tracing the conflict to Justice Barrett's pleading burden or Justice Jackson's commencement barrier, the result is the same. These gears, Rules 3, 8, and 12, trigger Step 1 of Shady Grove. Dropping the Delaware statute into this machinery causes the federal system to seize up. This advances the court to Step 2, confirming that the federal rules are actually valid under the Rules Enabling Act. Under the court's SIBOC standard, a rule is valid if it really regulates procedure and governs the manner and means of enforcing rights. Rules 3, 8, and 12 easily meet the standard. They strictly regulate the process of litigation, giving them supreme authority over the conflicting state law. Berk v. Choy proves the federal rules of civil procedure function as a closed-loop system. No matter how pressing a state's policy interest may be, it cannot hack the federal machinery to impose standalone